my very first encounter that I can think of is always being seen as this problem child. Growing up, I went to a Catholic school. Um, I was taught by all white teachers, and because of some of the things that I was inundated with growing up in my environment, I think I was perceived as a problem child. I was never asked, how are things at home, or what are you going through, or things of that nature. It was always um, impressed upon me that you're a problem and you're always causing issues. There was one particular time in which I wrote a poem, and that's how I really coped with a lot of the different things that I dealt with. And ended up giving this poem to my English teacher. Um, and as I went back to her to see what her thoughts were pertaining to the poem, um, she commented that I didn't write the poem and suggested that I didn't have the ability to write like that, which was very painful in a sense. I spent a lot of time, a lot of what I was feeling at the time was on that in that poem, and I thought that I could be validated in that and share that with someone who I thought was um, was appropriate to be able to validate writing, and it didn't. Um, but as I started to get older and more and wiser, one of the things I continuously experience is like these racial slights or microaggressions, if you will. And these can come in the form of just comments. Some individuals will say to me, "Oh, wow, you're so articulate," but my white counterpart will not receive those type of comments as if I'm not supposed to be articulate in that way. And some of the things that I say would be very similar to my white counterparts. Um, or the comment about coming to me and asking me questions pertaining to the black community as if our lifestyles are very common, and we live this very narrow kind of experience, which is not true, and nor do I speak for all African Americans or African American males. And so there's things like that constantly gets inundated. You start feeling this burden of responsibility when it comes to the black community, and when you are in a classroom setting and you're the only African American person in the room, and a question arises about minorities or African Americans, and you're looked at to have an answer for that. It becomes burdensome and becomes it really impacts how your own narrative and you feeling like you have the responsibility to speak in that manner. And so when we start talking about race, power, and privilege, it's these narratives that play out, it's these ideas that play out that continuously act as burdens for me, particularly, and some of the things that I have to experience daily, yearly, throughout my life. Um, that just becomes more burdensome to deal with. There's definitely education that needs to happen, and I think that people have to do their own work. When we start talking about privilege, this idea of racism, which racism is, really when you deconstruct it, it is about privilege and power in things that you are afforded over other individuals, and so it's not something that you have the ability to say, "Oh, well, I don't want that." It's something that's just inherited, and so we really have to start looking at what racism is and understanding it and defining it in more of an educational way, so that we have a better ownership of what that privilege is. But I think people don't want to be seen negatively, and I think within our society. Um, we would rather distance ourselves from something that is perceived to be negative than to really address the issue. When we think of individuals and how they start off, when we think about from a historical standpoint of privilege, material privilege, having the opportunities available to you um, to for home ownership and access to certain um, things. those things are privileged, right? And so when you find yourselves or a population that's constantly um, in that sector, and then you find another population who is constantly not, then there's things that arise that you have to really address, and you have to say, you know, because of my own privilege, here's the work that I can do, and this is what I can do differently to make sure that others will have access. And then when you don't have that access, I think the most important thing to do is to just position yourself and to think about um, your perception and not thinking that your perception of your way of being is consistent with how everybody else lives. Um, so yeah, I think when it comes to privilege, we definitely need to educate ourselves a little bit more on it. We have to start distancing ourselves away from this idea of privilege as being a negative thing, but a thing that we just need more understanding around so that we can appropriately address it and address some of the different factors that are harmful to others when those things arise.